Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today we're going to talk about all of the books that I read in June. In June, I participated in the Joy Reading June readathon, and I have to say that overall my reading this month has in fact been more joyful than it had been for several months. Starting in February of this year, due to things that happened outside of our control in the month of February, my reading and my pleasure in reading kind of took a bit of a nosedive and has been floundering ever since. Not necessarily from the same cause, although I guess it can take a while to recover from emotional trauma, I guess, although that might be kind of a strong phrase to use in our case, but it did take me a while to get back into enjoying reading and being able to focus my mind on reading. And then I think just life was busy and had a lot of things on my plate, and that combined with I guess not really having any really amazing books that I was thoroughly enjoying contributed to the issue. On top of which, in I think it was March, I was trying to read too many big books at one time and I just got bogged down in those. So that combination of factors, I just have had trouble. I wouldn't say that I've been slumpy for the past several months, but I definitely have not been reading at my usual pace or my usual level of enjoyment, which is fine because I know these things ebb and flow in the course of your life and in different seasons of life. But it was really nice to have more time in June to read. Our school let out the first week of June, and since then I've been busy. I've had a lot to keep me occupied, but I've also had plenty of downtime to really focus more on reading, and that's been very enjoyable and very joyful, and I have enjoyed it tremendously. Lots of joy in there. So let's talk about what I read first in the order that I read them. I actually am back to my more usual total of reading 8 or 9 books in a month. That's my average. For most of this year, it's been more like 5 or 6. So in terms of quantity, that's been nice to get back to what is for me a normal level. I feel like my life is getting back to normal, I guess, in a way. To be fair though, 2 of those books I started in May and finished in June. So we'll start with those, and I don't still have copies of some of these. Some of these I've already passed on, or some of them on my Kindle. The first one was on my Kindle, and that is Mountain Laurel by Laurie Benton. And I read that. I started at the end of May and finished it towards the beginning of June. And I loved the writing in this story, and I loved the historic setting. It was set on a plantation in the South, and it has strong themes of redemption. And I really loved the interesting perspective that we get in this story, because you're looking through the eyes of a man and a woman who loves him, but this man is struggling with really big character issues and flaws, and you see how he makes decisions that are impetuous and impulsive and self-centered that hurt people who are close to him, people that he does love, but he just acts in such a way that he ends up offending them or hurting them and hurting himself in the process. And you really see what is drawing him to make these choices. And I think that it was a bold choice by the author, but I think she did it overall very well. But what resulted was sort of a soap opera-ish storyline that continued in the second book in the series, which I'll get to in a minute here. And there was a lot going on in the story. There was so much. I would have liked it to have been a little bit more streamlined in its focus, and I think the plot would have been better served to also have been streamlined just a little bit and not to have quite so much happening in it, because it did end up having a bit of a soap opera feel. That was a Christian fiction book, and I did feel like the faith elements were added a lot to the story, and it wasn't just like it's a story with talk about God thrown in, which is my least favorite kind of Christian fiction, but the story itself was representative of God's redeeming work in someone's life, and that was, I really enjoyed that. And then I read Jane Austen Alive by Claire Tomalin, which is obviously a biography about Jane Austen, who is, of course, as we all know, one of my favorite authors. And I did enjoy this biography. I enjoyed a lot of it. There was, like, let's say it was 60-40. 60% of it I enjoyed, 40% of it I did not. And that 60 and 40% are pretty thoroughly intermixed throughout the book. So it's not like I liked the first 60% and I hated the last 40%. It was like 60% of the things about this book I liked and 40% of the things I really didn't like. And one thing that I did not like was the author's literary analysis, because I felt like she was reading Jane Austen's books through a lens that was totally different from any lens I have ever read them in. And it was a very negative, skeptical, modern literary analysis sort of lens that I did not interest me in the least. And I did not agree with most of her analysis. I think that we do Jane Austen's work a disservice if we look at it so much through a skeptical isn't the right word. It's some, I'm looking for a word that's stronger than that. Our 21st century, can't think of the word that I want to say, but it's beyond skepticism, and it's more like nihilism is maybe a little bit too strong. But basically, it was just a very negative perspective on Jane Austen's books. And even though she was very sympathetic of Jane Austen herself and, you know, her life and her viewpoints, etc., all of that stuff, her look at Austen's work was not like that at all. So I was curious why she even, like, why were you writing a biography of Jane Austen? Did you even like her books? It didn't seem like she liked her books at all. So I didn't like that, and she does offer within the course of this book a literary analysis based on what's happening in Jane Austen's life at the time of all of her novels. I would skip those parts if I read it again, which I probably never will. Also, I didn't like how she read into things that Jane Austen said and made more of them than should have been. We don't have enough context, I don't think, for a lot of what Jane Austen said and did. And so I think that it doesn't do us or her any service to try to overanalyze those things. I think that also she did not take into consideration how often Jane Austen was joking in her words, and you can tell usually in her tone, but not always. And I think if she's saying something that seems very shocking or very contradictory to other viewpoints that Austen clearly expresses as a person, I think that we should assume that she is joking. So she took some of it too seriously, and then there were just some overly modern feminist views interposed onto Jane Austen's life, or superimposed onto her life, that I just did not enjoy. So 60-40. 60% of it I appreciated. I learned a lot about Austen. I learned a lot about her family and her friends and her neighborhood. There is a lot about that. And this book, it delves really pretty deeply into all the people that she knew and interacted with in her life, which I found very helpful actually, and enjoyable and interesting. But the personal interpretation of some of Jane Austen's words and her work, that's the part I didn't love. I didn't appreciate most of that. And then I buddy read Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow with Cheryl at Candlewick Library. And this was such a delightful read. Oh my goodness. It was so good. I loved this poem. Probably one of the best poems. I guess it's considered long form. It's not really super long, but it is a longer poem. It tells the whole story of Evangeline. and her lost love. And it also tells the story of the displacement of the Acadians during the war between the British and the French before the American Revolution. And it was just, his nature descriptions were unparalleled, absolutely beautiful. So if you enjoy nature descriptions in your writing or in your poetry, you will love this one. You just feel like you are immersed into the settings. And he goes all over what is now the United States, but wasn't then, in this book. They start in Acadia, which is Nova Scotia, so Canada, but then they go down to Louisiana, and he describes the marshes and the bayou and all of that in Louisiana. It just describes it perfectly. And then we go out west into Michigan, which was very much west at the time. I think we go even further west than that. And then we circle back to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And each time you are just immersed in that setting and you feel like you're there. And it is astonishing to me that of all of those places, Philadelphia was the only one that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow actually ever visited. So his descriptions, they are amazing, and they put you right in the spot of the places that I have been. He described them perfectly. And I'm amazed at how he was able to do that. And the story itself is a tragic, romantical story, but the poetry is just breathtaking, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. Then I also read The Secret Keeper of Old Depot Grocery, and that was so fun. That was by Amanda Cox, who is an author I've been meaning to try for a really long time, and I'm so glad I finally did. Her writing was very good. I enjoyed it. Not like my super favorite of all time is going to supersede any of my other favorite authors like Francine Rivers, for example, or anything like that, but definitely a talented author, and I enjoyed the book very much. It deals with 3 generations of women and the secrets that they keep from each other, and how those secrets weigh them down, and how those secrets affect their relationship and their relationships with other people. And it's women's fiction at its best. I don't always love women's fiction. Sometimes it's a little bit too introspective, but I think the fact that it was 3 women's stories and how they affected each other as well, and you had that relational aspect going. It didn't get too deep into one person's inner psyche too much. It was just really exploring, and not only their inner lives and their secrets, but their relationships with each other and their life choices, etc. All centered on an Old Depot grocery store that was kind of their common ground and their shared heritage and legacy. And so I really enjoyed that story. And it had so many wise quotes in it, so much that was worthy of writing down and remembering. And then I read The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 6. Thoroughly enjoyed it, as usual. I did not love how it ended, so I'm interested to read Volume 7 and see where we go from there. I wasn't a big fan of the ending of Volume 6. And the very beginning had some scenes that were just a little bit too silly for me. It wasn't my favorite in the whole series, but still in the end, I gave it 5 stars. It's just delightful, charming, whimsical, fun, wonderful reads for joy reading in June or anytime. Then I read The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare, which was probably my least favorite read of the whole month. I'm gonna say, yeah, definitely my least favorite read of the whole month. I gave this one 2 stars, and I did not love it. First of all, it had very little to do with Eleanor Dare, who was one of the members of the lost colony of Roanoke, which is a topic in history that interests me very much. And so I was hoping for a little bit more of that. There wasn't, it was about her and her imagined descendants, but it didn't really dig too much into that history. We didn't get a lot of firsthand experience of Eleanor Dare. And so much of this was imagined and altered history. It wasn't realistic in any way. And although I do enjoy historical fiction, emphasis on the fiction, and although I do acknowledge that we don't know a lot about Eleanor Dare and the other people who were lost in that colony, so anything that would be written about them would be largely imagined, I still would have preferred it to have a little bit more historical accuracy, if it were possible. It would have been nice. And also, I did not like the main character in this story, and that's not always enough to make me dislike a book, because sometimes a character you're meant to dislike, and I think we kind of are in this one, but she doesn't have enough growth in the story to really make it feel worth it when you get to the end. And some of the worldview presented in here, I just strongly disagreed with, and that really soured the whole experience for me, as it would for anybody. So some of it was personal. Other people would enjoy this book on a much greater level than I did, because they wouldn't have those same negative responses to what was being presented thematically here. But also it was a little bit disappointing in the historic elements, and it was also very disappointing in the writing style, which was very disjointed and difficult to follow and difficult to understand at times. Not that I didn't understand what was happening in the story, it's just when we have these introspective thoughts of the character, she's jumping from one thing to another, and it's very difficult to follow her train of thought and to really grasp what she's thinking and feeling in a given situation, and to fully understand it and be able to embrace it. So it made it difficult to really enjoy the story. I didn't love it overall in the end. Not a favorite. And then I read Shiloh, and this was on Kindle Unlimited. This was the second book in the series. Mountain Laurel was the first. That was the first book I finished in June. I also read Shiloh, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine, but it wasn't great. I like how the story ended up being resolved and the ending of everything, but like Mountain Laurel, but worse, this one was just dealing with too much. The narrative was spread far too thinly over so many characters and storylines. You would have needed another 200 to 300 pages to really do each of them justice. And it fell a little flat for me in that sense. Furthermore, I felt like I couldn't really get into the mindset of our main character, Shona, and I feel like her struggles and the emotions that she was experiencing, I was being told about them rather than shown them. And so I wasn't able to really have a great deal of empathy for her, because I wasn't able to enter into it with her as the reader. So it was a disappointment a little bit. I mean, I didn't wholeheartedly love the first one, Mountain Laurel, so I wasn't expecting too much more from Shiloh. So I guess it wasn't really so much of a disappointment, but it definitely didn't rise above Mountain Laurel. It was maybe not even as enjoyable as Mountain Laurel, although I did enjoy the resolution of the story and how everything played out in the end. And I will try to read more by this author and give her another chance and another book or two and see. I do think that I had read another one of hers a long time ago, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and really enjoyed that one. I think it was called The Pursuit of Tamsin Littlejohn or something like that. And I remember really enjoying that one. So I think I may like other books by her. These ones they didn't rise to the top for me. And then a book that I did thoroughly enjoy and have raved about already on this channel, that is Salt of the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. And this is the 3rd book I have read by her, and the 3rd book I have loved by her. I first read The Fountains of Silence and really enjoyed it. I felt it had some minor flaws that I didn't love about it, but overall, I just really enjoyed her writing, and I enjoyed the characters, and I enjoyed the setting, and I enjoyed learning about an aspect of history about which I knew nothing, and that was Spain after their own revolution, I guess, or civil war, and then their dictatorship that they experienced for most of the 20th century. And I knew very little about that. So that was really interesting to me. And then I read I Must Betray You, which is one of her more recent ones, I think. And that was set in Romania during the time when I was a child and growing up. So it was very current history for me. And that made it very fascinating to me and very much drew me into the story. Plus, it was just incredibly well written. Her research is impeccable. Her knowledge of the culture and the people about which she's writing is just unsurpassed. She puts excellent research into her books, and her writing is just phenomenal. And Salt of the Sea was no different. I admired her writing from page 1. It just immersed you into the story, and it put you in the characters' heads, and it told the story so beautifully and seemingly effortlessly, but obviously care went into each and every word. And I thoroughly enjoyed it so much. This was about refugees who are fleeing the advancing Russian army during the Second World War. And so they're fleeing from different parts of Eastern Europe and like Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Prussia. And they're heading towards Germany. So they're going from the frying pan into the fire, right? But they don't have much choice. They're just trying to get out of the way of the enemy. And so they go to this ship that is taking them further away from the advancing Russian army. And unfortunately, Russian submarines torpedo the ship and it ends up sinking. And so the story is told through 4 main characters. They're fictional characters, but the actual sinking part of the story is true. And so much of the story is based on actual fact and experiences of people who were fleeing the Russian army at that time in World War II. And it was just so wonderfully told. There were parts of this story where I was like, my eyes were wide open and my heart was racing and I was wondering what was going to be happening next. And there were times when I had tears in my eyes and a lump in my throat. There were times when I was disgusted by some of the characters. There were times when I was in awe of some of the characters, and sometimes I was rooting for them. Thoroughly drawn into the story and thoroughly enjoyed it. And yes, I highly recommend Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. And finally, just today, because it is June 30th as I'm filming this, I finished Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. And it took me basically the whole entire month to finish this because of all the annotations. It's 850 pages. And it was definitely worthwhile. I won't say too much more about it because I've talked at length about Mansfield Park on this channel. I just read it last year and gave a big analysis of it from my experience reading it that time. So I don't have too much more to say about it except that it's Jane Austen and I loved it as always. It's not my favorite Austen story, but I gain new insight into it each time I read that. And I am in awe of Austen's skill in crafting characters with this one. I think she really shines in this book. These characters are so true to life in their mix of goodness and flaws, and it's just really interesting to see how expertly she pegs human character in this novel. Just very well done. I settled on 4.5 stars for this one. I know, shocking, and didn't give Austen a 5-star. I think I gave it 5 stars when I read it last year, but it didn't hit that 5-star mark for me this time around. But it was definitely, it was Austen. It's enjoyable. You can't go wrong. Austen is amazing. So the good thing is that I was able to cross off a couple things on some different lists. So first of all, in my reading journal, I have some lists of authors that I wanted to try for the first time. And so I had made these lists, and I made it last year, but I didn't finish all of them last year, so I was able to cross off a couple more. So in Christian authors I want to try, I was able to cross off Amanda Cox because I read The Secrets of Old Depot Grocery, and I would definitely be reading more by her. And then I also read Laurie Benton. Now I forgot that I had actually already read something by Laurie Benton before. I just had forgotten that. But anyways, I read Laurie Benton. And then also the other 2 on this list are Lynn Austen and T. Cooper. And I have read one thing I think by Lynn Austen that I did enjoy, but that was years ago and I forgot when I made this list. I forgot that I had read that. And then T. Cooper, I still have not read anything by her, but I would like to. Also, I was able to add another book to my list of nonfiction that I read in 2025. So far, I've read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I had gotten off to a really great start earlier this year, reading a lot more nonfiction, but I've slowed down the past month or 2, so I need to pick up that pace again a little bit. And I also added a book to my 5-star reads list, Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys, as well as the Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 6 by Beth Brower, and Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So 3 5-star reads in the month of June, which was another reason why it was an incredible reading month for me. I thoroughly enjoyed each of those books and loved them very much. I'm glad that my reading is looking up a little bit. And because I read Evangeline, I was able to cross another one off my list. There it is right there in my 50 by 50. So far I've read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 books in my 50 by 50, which isn't too bad. I'd kind of like to have 10 by the end of this year. So I need 3 more by the end of this year. So I'm doing okay with that. And then my goal is that half of the books I read this year be actually physical books from my shelf. And I'm doing really well with that because so far this year I've read 45 books and 25 of them have been from my shelf. So that is actually more than half. So I'm very pleased with that. And I'm proud of myself for reading those books. I am staying on top of my Reading the Classics challenge, which is good because it's my challenge, so I better. And so I read Mansfield Park by Jane Austen for the prompt of June, which was to read a book with 500 plus pages. And let's see, it was supposed to have a foreign country, a female protagonist, and a Greek myth. So it does cover those. For me, it was set in England, so that's a foreign country to me. But also, in this book, this is a unique Austen book in that Sir Thomas Bertram, however you put that together, he went to Antigua. Now, we don't go with him, but we hear some about his journeys, and he's going to an exotic place. So a foreign country is mentioned in this story, so I think that's worthwhile. And then female protagonist was Fanny Price. And then for the Greek myth, these are the scavenger hunt items, by the way. For the Greek myth, there were a couple of different occasions when Greek myths were mentioned in this story. One in particular I remember is when, so Fanny is living with the Bertram family, who are her cousins, and when she comes to them, she's 10 years old, and her education has been inferior. And her cousins note this right away, and they are complaining to their mother all of the things that Fanny is ignorant of, and among them is Greek mythology. And so they talk about that a little bit. So then for Chantel's Read Your Shelf Challenge, the June prompt was bird, and so I read The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare, which had peacock feathers on the cover. I put it back, so I won't show you, but it has peacock feathers on the cover, and actually a peacock features prominently in the story. I mean, it's not a huge part of the plot, but it's kind of a character in the story, a very small minor character. For Jane Reads Christian Fiction Reading Challenge 2025, I read Shiloh by Laurie Benton because the prompt was to read a one-word title, and that's a one-word title. For Celebrating Jane Austen, that was Mansfield Park. And of course, I read Mansfield Park, so I am staying on top of that. I'm so thankful that I have been able to stay on all of these. I was able to color off quite a few places. So all of these bright green states are states that were settings for books that I read in the month of June. That is quite a lot. And let's see, Evangeline provided a lot of them. Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and Michigan in particular were mentioned in that one. The Secrets of Old Depot Grocery, I believe that the story takes place in Georgia or Tennessee. Well, I know Georgia was The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare. That was definitely in Georgia. Tennessee, the Old Depot might have been in Tennessee. I think it was Tennessee. And then she goes, one of the characters goes to Chicago, Illinois. So I crossed that off also. And in Florida, our characters go to Florida as well in The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare. So these people were traveling all over the United States in these stories. Shiloh also, but I already had New York covered, and I already had colored in New York and Massachusetts. So they were in New York and Massachusetts, as well as, where was that plantation in Mountain Laurel? Is that Tennessee? It might have been Tennessee. It was somewhere in the South, one of those southern states. Anyway, and then with Salt to the Sea, I was able to color in some European countries here in my map of the world. So Poland and Latvia and Lithuania and that little part of Russia there that's in between Poland and Lithuania. So yeah, colored in a few more of those. So I put down Salt to the Sea as being my favorite read in June, but honestly, you could put Evangeline in there as well. Evangeline was a wonderful read. I enjoyed that a lot too. So you could put that in there too. I don't know which of these three from April, May, or June is going to win. Pride and Prejudice, The Count of Monte Cristo, or Salt to the Sea. I'm leaning towards Pride and Prejudice only because for me, that's like a perennial favorite. I mean, that goes both for it and against it, right? Like, is it fair? Because it's always going to be a favorite. If I read it in a year, it's going to be a favorite, right? I'm going to reread it again at some point. Salt to the Sea, will I ever reread it? I don't know. I doubt it. So even though it was an immersive and wonderful experience when I read it, I don't know that has the lasting power. Count of Monte Cristo was very enjoyable. I don't know if I'll ever read it again because of the length. It's just a daunting time commitment. And there's so many books to read. I don't know if I would want to devote that much time to a book I've already read, even though I enjoyed it a lot. So I don't know, Pride and Prejudice might win of those three. I also participated in the historical fiction readathon for 2025, and I will put the hosts and the information in the description box about that. So you can know what I'm talking about if you don't already. I know this was intended for June or whatever, and it just goes through June, but I have one more book that one of more of these prompts that a book that I'm reading in July will fit for. So I am going to retrofit it into this one after I've read it so that we'll have done all the prompts. And there is one book that I started today that will also fit for one of these prompts. So 2 of these prompts I will actually be reading in July, but they're going for this readathon. They work for it, so I can fill in all the blanks and say that I did all the prompts. I'm gonna make it work, okay? But the ones that I have actually read already are reading a work of alternate historical fiction. And for that, I put The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare because it definitely gave an alternative, or I don't know about an alternative. I mean, alternative in the sense we know that's not what happened. And I would say probably more accurately described as imagined history, like what if this is what happened, because it's a bit of a mystery. We don't know exactly what happened. So what if this is something that happened? So it's kind of imagined history, I guess. And then for read a work of historical fiction with a dual timeline, The Secret Keepers of Old Depot Grocery has 2 timelines. And the older timeline works toward the current timeline. So they end up being on the same timeline, but you do get, like, every other chapter is going back in time, and then that brings you through developments of things that are happening current day in the story. And then the other one was to read a work of historical fiction about a specific event, and Salt to the Sea was for that prompt, and because it was specifically about the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. And then I read 2 other historical fiction books, Mountain Laurel and Shiloh by Lori Benton. And then for the June journeys with Inklings, I did not focus too much on this readathon. First of all, I read the Bible. I'm currently reading through Spurgeon and the Psalms and really enjoying that a lot. So I did do that one. And then read a book influenced by the Inklings or that influenced the Inklings. And I read Mansfield Park. And I know that C.S. Lewis had mentioned Jane Austen and her work as being influential in his life as a person and as a writer himself. And then for summer book bingo, I was able to mark off a few more spots here on the bingo board, and I almost have a bingo here. I just need a friend recommendation there, which might be tricky, but I'm getting close to getting a bingo here. So what did I fill in June? So first of all, for wilderness and survival, I put Shiloh by Lori Benton. So in Shiloh, they are forging into the wilderness of New York, and they are building a life from scratch there. And there is definitely some elements of wilderness survival there. They get caught in the wilderness. There are foes in the wilderness. There are traps in the wilderness. Like they're in the wilderness, like they're living in the wilderness and trying to build a life from that. So I put that for that prompt. And by the way, both Shiloh and Evangeline, those are like opposite sorts of books, but both of them would fit for my Prairie Trail readathon in August, because they both deal with westward expansion. Now, technically, New York was one of the original 13 colonies, but the place where they go in New York is definitely the wilderness. It's definitely a westward expansion. It's definitely fits in with that prompt, and it fits in the time frame. It's in the late 1700s, like 1797, 1798. So I think that it totally fits. And so does, well, Evangeline may start out a little early ahead of the time frame, but by the end I think it's solidly within the time frame of the westward expansion. But it definitely goes into, like, they go out west, and it has elements of the Wild West, sort of, well, not the Wild West, but like, you know, forging a life out of the West, out of the frontier. So both of those could fit for that challenge if you're looking for something. Anyway, then book in a series. I read The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. That's that one right there, volume 6. Then for Ocean, Salt to the Sea was a perfect fit for that one. And then flowers on the title and on the cover, I went with Mountain Laurel, which has flower in the title and on the cover. So boom, boom. And then a new to you author, and that was Amanda Cox with The Secret Keepers of Old Depot Grocery. I'd never read anything by her before. Outside my comfort zone, I put The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare in there because there was a lot of like supernatural elements and mystical things, which are definitely not in my comfort zone. I don't typically read books with things like that in it, so that was outside my comfort zone. Then the shortest book on my TBR was Evangeline, which is a pretty short book. The actual story takes up fewer than 100 pages. The other pages in my book are like annotations and explanations and additional information. So it was a very short book. And then the opposite, a book over 500 pages, was Mansfield Park, which came in at 850 pages. So I am doing well on that. So in July, I'm hoping to get a couple bingos there. For Big Book Summer, actually 3 books I read in June would count. Mansfield Park by Jane Austen would count for that, as would Mountain Laurel, because I think you had to start by Memorial Day weekend, and I started that one after that. So I mean, you had to start it after that, or during the Memorial Day, whatever. Anyways, I started that one after that. So Mountain Laurel is over 400 pages, and so is Shiloh, and so is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I didn't write the other 2 in there because I'm planning on putting Emma in the second space, and then I'm seeing what else I might get to maybe in August. That will be a longer book. But if I don't get to another one in August, I will put one of those Laurie Benton books there, or another book that I read, because I may read another one that is that long as well. We'll see. I don't know what the page lengths are for the books that I have going in July right now off the top of my head. So that was my reading in June. All in all, I really enjoyed my reading this past month, and I am looking forward to my reading in July. I feel like July is going to be even better than June was, and so I'm very excited about that, and I'm happy about my June reading finally having a great month. So let me know in the comments your thoughts about any of the books that I've read, and your thoughts about my thoughts about the books that I read, and also let me know in the comments how your month of reading went in June. Did it go well? Did you enjoy your reading? Did you have some 5-star reads? What was your favorite read this month? Tell me all the things I want to know. And let's all have a fantastic month of reading in July. And I will see you next time. Bye.